Let me ask you something. Has anyone ever said something to you in English that sounded perfectly nice, perfectly polite, perfectly fine on the surface, but somewhere inside you, something felt a little off? Like there was a message underneath the message? Like the person was being careful with their words in a way that made you think, wait, are they actually trying to tell me something here? And you couldn't quite put your finger on it, so you just nodded and moved on. But the feeling stayed with you? If that's happened to you, and I'm willing to bet it has, then today is your day. Because today, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most fascinating and honestly one of the most important things in the English language. We are going to talk about hedging, about how English speakers soften their opinions, about how they wrap difficult or sensitive truths in careful, polite, sometimes almost invisible language, and about how you, as a listener, can start to hear it, understand it, and respond to it in a way that makes you so much better at navigating real English conversations. Welcome back. My name is Alex, and this is English in Fluency, the channel where we go deep into how English actually works in real life. Not in textbooks, not in grammar exercises, in real conversations between real people dealing with real things. Every episode on this channel is about giving you a new level of listening, a new layer of understanding. And today's topic, hedging, is one that I think every single learner of English, at every level, needs to understand. Because it's everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere in everyday English. And once you start hearing it, the language opens up in a completely new way. So what exactly is hedging? Here's the simplest way I can put it. Hedging is when a speaker deliberately makes their statement softer, less direct, less absolute. Usually to be polite, or to avoid conflict, or because they're genuinely not completely sure, or because they want to leave room for the other person to disagree without feeling attacked. It's the difference between saying, "Your idea is wrong," and saying, "I'm not sure that idea would work in this context." The meaning is similar, but the experience of hearing them is completely different. One closes a door, the other leaves it open. And in English, especially in professional, social, and emotional conversations, leaving the door open is often the kindest and most skillful thing a speaker can do. Now here's what makes hedging interesting from a listening perspective. Because when you hedge, you're not saying nothing. You're not being dishonest. You're saying something real, but you're saying it carefully, with a kind of thoughtfulness that protects both you and the person you're speaking to. And the challenge for the listener, the thing we're going to work on today, is learning to hear what's inside the hedge. Learning to understand the real message that's wrapped in the careful, polite language. Because if you only hear the politeness and miss the message, you've missed the conversation. Today we are going to follow a character named Sophie. Sophie is 27 years old. She works at a design agency, and she's been learning English for about 5 years. Her English is solid. She can hold her own in meetings. She can write clear emails. She can have long conversations without losing her thread. But she has a specific gap in her listening. When people are being careful and indirect, when they're hedging, she tends to hear only the surface politeness and miss the real content underneath. She hears the soft packaging but doesn't unwrap it, and that gap has caused her some real problems, both at work and in her personal life. Sophie's closest friend at work is a man named Joel. Joel is 32, warm, thoughtful, and a genuinely skilled communicator. He notices things, he hears things, and he has been quietly helping Sophie tune her listening for the last few months. Not as a formal teacher, just as a friend who pays attention to the same things she's trying to understand. He's the kind of person who will say, after a difficult meeting, "Did you catch what Anna was really saying there?" And then patiently walk Sophie through it. There's also a character named Catherine. Catherine is the creative director at Sophie's agency. She's been in the industry for 15 years. She's brilliant at her work, and she is a master hedger. Not in a manipulative way, in a thoughtful, considerate way. She almost never says anything bluntly. Everything she says has been weighed. Every opinion she expresses has been wrapped in language that makes it easy to receive. And at first, Sophie found this confusing, because Catherine always sounded so positive and encouraging. But over time, with Joel's help, Sophie has started to understand that Catherine's careful language is not the absence of criticism. It's criticism delivered with exceptional skill. And finally, there's a client named Greg. Greg is the kind of person who thinks he's being very direct, but who actually hedges constantly. Not out of politeness, but out of a slight anxiety about conflict. Greg avoids saying hard things directly. He wraps them in questions, in suggestions, in just thinking out loud language, and this makes him hard to read, because his hedging comes from discomfort rather than consideration. The difference, as we'll see, matters. Okay, let's get into the story. It's a Monday morning, and Sophie has just presented a piece of design work to Catherine. It's a logo redesign for a new client, and Sophie has worked hard on it. She's proud of it. She thinks it's one of the better things she's done. She presents it on screen, walks Catherine through the thinking, and finishes. She waits. Catherine looks at the work for a moment. Then she says, "I really appreciate the direction you took here. There's a lot of interesting thinking in this. I can see you put real care into it." She pauses. "I think where we might want to spend a little more time is on the relationship between the mark and the typography. I wonder if there's a version where those two elements feel a little more unified. Does that make sense?" She smiles warmly. "But honestly, the foundation is strong. There's definitely something here worth developing." Sophie hears this, and she feels, on balance, pretty good. She thinks, Catherine likes it. She said the foundation is strong. She said there's something here worth developing. There are a couple of things to look at, but overall, positive. She leaves the meeting feeling encouraged. Later, she finds Joel in the kitchen. She says, "Catherine saw the logo today. I think it went well." Joel says, "What did she say?" Sophie relays the feedback roughly. Joel listens, and then he tilts his head in that way he has, just slightly, which Sophie has learned means he's about to say something she might not immediately want to hear. He says, "Okay, can I just walk you through what I heard in that?" Sophie says, "Sure." And Joel says, "When Catherine says, 'I think where we might want to spend a little more time,' that means the thing needs more work. Not a little tweak. Real work. Might want to spend more time is her way of saying, this part isn't right yet." Sophie frowns. "But she said the foundation is strong." Joel nods. "She did. And she meant it. Catherine doesn't say things she doesn't mean. But the foundation is strong is also a hedge. It's her way of saying, The concept is okay, but the execution needs to change significantly. Sophie is quiet for a second. So she didn't like it? Joel shakes his head. That's not what I said. She liked the direction. She liked the thinking. But the specific execution, the mark and the type together, she has a real problem with it. She just said it in the kindest, most constructive way she could. And there it is. The whole thing in miniature. Catherine gave Sophie real, substantive feedback, but she delivered it wrapped in so much careful, warm, encouraging language that Sophie heard the wrapping and almost missed the message inside. And this is not Sophie's fault. Catherine is genuinely skilled, and her hedging is genuinely kind. But the job of a good listener is to unwrap the package, to hear what's inside. And that's what Joel is helping Sophie do. Let's slow down and look at Catherine's feedback more closely, because it's a beautiful example of hedging in action, and I want to make sure you can hear every layer of it. I really appreciate the direction you took here. This is an opener that signals Catherine is going to give a positive frame before getting to the substance. Really appreciate is warm, but notice, she appreciates the direction, not the execution. The direction, where it was going, not what it produced. That's specific, and it's worth noticing. There's a lot of interesting thinking in this. Interesting is one of the most famous hedge words in English, and we've touched on it before on this channel. In everyday conversation, interesting can mean genuinely interesting, but in feedback situations, interesting very often means, I see what you were trying to do, and I respect the attempt, but I'm not sure it fully worked. It's a polite way of engaging with something without endorsing it. I can see you put real care into it. This is empathy hedging. She's acknowledging the effort before she addresses the result. And this is kind, and it's human. But it's also a preparatory move. You acknowledge the effort right before you're about to suggest the result needs to change. The acknowledgement cushions what's coming. I think where we might want to spend a little more time is on the relationship between the mark and the typography. Let's count the hedges in this one sentence. I think she's presenting it as her opinion, not as a fact. We might want, not you need to, not this has to change, but we might want to. Plural, softened, optional sounding. Spend a little more time. Not redo, not fix, but spend more time. It sounds gentle. A little more time. Small, modest, not dramatic. But what she's actually saying is, this relationship doesn't work, and it needs to be rethought. I wonder if there's a version where those two elements feel a little more unified. I wonder if this is a thinking out loud phrase. She's framing her critique as a question, as an exploration, as curiosity, not as a verdict. Feel a little more unified. Feel, not are. She's describing a perception. And a little more. Again, softening the scale of the change she's suggesting, even though the actual change needed might be significant. Does that make sense? This question at the end is a check-in that also functions as a softener. It puts Sophie in the driver's seat momentarily. It says, I'm offering this as a perspective, not a decree. You can engage with it. The foundation is strong. Positive statement. True, as far as it goes. But placed here, after all the careful suggestions, the foundation is strong means the concept survives, but the work on top of it needs to change. The foundation is what's underneath. The building still needs to be built. There's definitely something here worth developing. Another genuine positive. She's not dismissing the work. She believes in the potential. But worth developing means it isn't there yet. It has to be developed further. This is encouragement and critique simultaneously, delivered so smoothly that the critique is easy to miss. So the full translation of Catherine's feedback, stripped of its careful packaging, is something like, I respect the thinking, and I believe in the concept, but the execution of the mark and typography relationship is not working and needs significant rework before this is ready. She just said it in a way that kept Sophie feeling respected and motivated rather than deflated and defensive. That's the art of hedging at its finest. Now, one question you might be asking is this kind of careful language honest? Is it actually a good thing to wrap feedback in so many softeners that the real message becomes hard to find? And I think this is a genuinely interesting question, and the answer depends on something important: the intent. When hedging comes from genuine care for the other person, from a desire to be honest while also being kind, it's one of the most valuable communication skills in existence. When it comes from a desire to avoid accountability, to say something without technically saying it, to leave room for deniability, that's a different thing. And as a listener, learning to hear the difference is crucial. Catherine's hedging is the first kind. It comes from care. She's not trying to hide the truth. She's trying to deliver it in a way Sophie can actually hear and use. She knows that if she said, "The mark and type don't work together, and you need to redo it," even though that would be faster and more direct, Sophie would feel deflated, would go back to her desk feeling criticized rather than guided, and the work might actually suffer as a result. The hedge is in service of the real goal: better work. That's honest hedging. That's hedging as a skill. Let's move into the next scene, because there's a very different kind of hedging I want to show you now. The kind that comes from discomfort rather than care. And for that, we need Greg. A few days later, Sophie is on a call with Greg, the client. They're discussing a new campaign brief. Greg has received the initial concepts Sophie's team put together, and he needs to give feedback. Sophie is on the call, and Joel is listening in because he's the account manager. Greg says, "Yeah, so I've had a look at everything. And, yeah, there's some good stuff in there. Definitely." He pauses. "I guess what I'm thinking is, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, would it be possible to maybe explore something that feels a bit more, I don't know, energetic? Like, not that this isn't good, because it is, but like, I suppose I was imagining something maybe a bit bolder, in terms of the overall feel? Does that make sense? I'm not sure I'm explaining this well." He laughs a little, nervously. Sophie, on the call, says, "Absolutely. We can definitely explore that direction." She sounds confident, cooperative. She hangs up and turns to Joel. "That was fine. He wants something more energetic. Easy." And Joel is quiet for a second. Then he says, "Did you hear what else was in there?" Sophie says, "What do you mean?" "He said he wants something bolder, more energetic." Joel says, "He said that. But he also said, it's good 3 times in different ways, while describing what's wrong with it. And he said, I'm just thinking out loud right before his actual main point. And he said, I don't know, in the middle of his key request." And he laughed nervously at the end. Sophie stares at him. "So?" And Joel says, "So, Greg doesn't think it's good. He thinks it's wrong. He's just so uncomfortable saying that directly that he wrapped it in so much 'it's good' but language that the 'but' got lost. He doesn't want bolder and more energetic as an addition to what you've done. He wants you to start again from a different direction." Sophie is quiet. "You got all that from—" He laughed. Joel smiles. "I got it from everything. The laugh. The, I'm just thinking out loud." The 3 times he said it was good before saying what was wrong. The "I don't know" in the middle of his request, which means he knows exactly what he wants, but he's uncomfortable saying it clearly. That's a person who is very anxious about giving negative feedback, which means the feedback is probably more negative than it sounds. And this is the other side of hedging, not the skilled, considerate Catherine kind, but the anxious, conflict-avoidant Greg kind, where the hedging comes from a deep discomfort with the truth, not from a desire to deliver it kindly. And the effect, for the listener, is actually more confusing, because Greg's hedging doesn't just soften the message, it obscures it, it buries it, and a listener who takes Greg's words at face value will walk away with the wrong understanding. Let's break down what Greg said and look at it the same way we looked at Catherine's feedback. "Yeah, so I've had a look at everything. And, yeah." He can't even finish the sentence. He starts to assess the work, loses confidence, and lands on "yeah," which is meaningless. This is a hesitation hedge. He's buying time. He's not ready to say the real thing. There's some good stuff in there, definitely. Some is a quantity hedge. Not, "there's a lot of great work here." There's some, a limited amount. And definitely here is being used almost sarcastically. Not sarcastic in tone, but in function. He's overcommitting to the positive in a way that feels slightly forced, which is often a signal that the positive is being used as a buffer. I guess what I'm thinking is, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, I guess is uncertainty language, but here it's being used to avoid owning what he's about to say. "I'm just kind of thinking out loud" is a classic distancing phrase. It means, what I'm about to say is real, but I want to be able to take it back if you react badly. It's the verbal equivalent of testing the temperature of water with one toe before stepping in. Would it be possible to maybe explore something that feels a bit more, I don't know, energetic? Would it be possible is a polite request form, but here it's being used to make a directive sound optional. He's not asking if it's possible. He's asking them to do it. The maybe further softens, and then, I don't know, right in the middle of his main point, is the most telling thing of all. He does know. He knows exactly what he wants. The "I don't know" is the discomfort showing. Not that this isn't good, because it is. This double negative, not that this isn't good, is a hedge inside a hedge. He's defending the work while critiquing it. He's protecting Sophie's feelings and his own position simultaneously. It's a linguistically complicated way of saying, "Please don't be upset at what I'm about to say." I suppose I was imagining something maybe a bit bolder in terms of the overall feel. "I suppose" is another distancing word. He's attributing the desire to something that happened in his imagination rather than owning it as a clear, present request. And the question mark at the end of bolder, the rising intonation, turns a statement into a question, which further softens it. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I'm explaining this well. He ends by undermining himself. This is a humility hedge. He's saying, maybe the problem is my communication, not the work. This is a way of apologizing in advance for the directness of the critique, while deflecting from the critique itself. So, what is Greg actually saying? Stripped of all the hedging? He's saying, this isn't right. The direction is wrong. I had a completely different feel in mind, and I need you to go back to the beginning and approach it differently. That's the real message. And it was completely buried under layers of uncomfortable, anxious, conflict-avoidant language. After Joel explains this to Sophie, she sits with it for a moment. She says, how am I supposed to respond to that in the moment? Like, if I'd understood what he was really saying on the call, what should I have done? And Joel says, you ask a clarifying question. Something like, it sounds like you're looking for a significantly different direction. Can you help me understand what feel you had in mind? That kind of question does two things. It reflects back what you heard, the real thing, not the surface politeness, and it gives him permission to be more direct. It says, I'm ready for the real answer. You don't have to soften it for me. And this is such an important practical tool. When you hear hedging, especially the anxious, unclear kind, the best response is often a gentle, direct, clarifying question. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just open. It sounds like you have some concerns. Can you help me understand them? Or, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Are you looking for something quite different? Or adjustments to what we've done? These questions give the hedger permission to drop the protection, to be real, to say the actual thing. And most of the time, when someone is hedging out of discomfort, what they want more than anything is exactly that permission. Let's shift now and spend some time on the mechanics, on the actual language of hedging in English. Because I've been showing you hedging in action through the story, but I want to make sure you have a clear, organized understanding of the main hedging tools so you can recognize them anywhere, in any conversation, in any context. The first and most fundamental hedging tool is what linguists call modal verbs. You've heard these before, and we've talked about them in previous episodes on this channel. Words like might, could, would, may, should. When a speaker uses a modal verb instead of a direct present tense statement, they are softening the certainty of what they're saying. This could be improved, rather than this needs to be improved. You might want to reconsider, rather than you should reconsider. It may not be the right fit, rather than it's not right. The modal creates distance between the speaker and the full weight of the statement. It says, this is my sense of things, but I'm holding it lightly. The second hedging tool is approximators. These are words that soften quantity, size, frequency, or degree. Words like a bit, a little, kind of, sort of, fairly, quite, rather, somewhat, pretty, slightly, around, about. It's a bit long, rather than it's too long. She's kind of difficult to work with, rather than she's difficult to work with. The budget is slightly over, rather than the budget is over. Each approximator pulls the statement back from the edge of directness and gives it a little room. It says, this is roughly true, to some extent, without going all the way to a full commitment. The third hedging tool is what we can call distancing phrases. Phrases that put space between the speaker and the statement. I think, I feel, I believe, I seem to remember, it seems to me, from my perspective, in my opinion. As far as I can tell, it appears that, it looks like. All of these take a statement and attach it explicitly to the speaker's perception, rather than presenting it as objective fact. I think the timeline is too tight, rather than the timeline is too tight. It seems to me that we're missing something, rather than we're missing something. The distancing phrase is humble. It says, "This is how it looks from where I'm standing." It might look different from where you're standing. The fourth hedging tool is what I'll call shield phrases. Phrases specifically designed to make a potential criticism more palatable. With all due respect, I don't want to be negative, but I could be wrong, but just to play devil's advocate. Not to be difficult, but I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way. Take this with a grain of salt. These phrases are signals that what's coming next is going to be critical or challenging, and the speaker is trying to soften the landing in advance. When you hear a shield phrase, perk up. Something real is coming. The fifth hedging tool is question framing. This is when a speaker delivers a critique or an opinion as a question rather than as a statement. Have you thought about whether the color is right, rather than the color isn't right? I wonder if the timing works here, rather than the timing doesn't work. Do you think this is the strongest version, rather than this isn't your strongest work? The question form is softer because it invites engagement rather than delivering a verdict. It says, "Let's explore this together." It doesn't say, "Here is the problem." And the sixth hedging tool is softening through positive framing, the technique Catherine used so skillfully. This is when critical feedback is sandwiched between genuine positive statements. It's often called the feedback sandwich in communication training, but in real speech it doesn't always feel as structured as that. It's more organic, more fluid. The speaker genuinely looks for something real and positive to say, says it, then delivers the critical point, then returns to the positive. The effect is that the criticism is received in a context of overall goodwill, which makes it much easier to hear and act on. All 6 of these tools, modal verbs, approximators, distancing phrases, shield phrases, question framing, and positive framing, are the building blocks of hedging in English. And knowing them by name means that the next time you hear them, you can say to yourself, "Ah, there's a hedge. What's inside it? Let's go back to Sophie, because there's a scene I want to share that brings all of this together in a different way, a more personal way." A few weeks into Sophie's unofficial listening education with Joel, she has a conversation that surprises her. She and a colleague named Tara, someone she's friendly with but not close to, are having coffee. And Tara says something that Sophie almost lets slide. Tara says, "I was talking to Mark the other day, and he mentioned the Morrison Project. He said something like, and I'm not quoting exactly, that he wasn't sure the team was fully aligned on the direction. Or something like that. I might have misunderstood." And then Tara moves on quickly to another topic. Sophie goes quiet for a second. Then, later, she replays that in her head. And she starts to hear it differently. Tara didn't just pass on neutral information, Tara hedged everything she said. Something like, not quoting exactly, "I might have misunderstood," in a way that made the information feel vague and unthreatening. But the information itself was not vague. Mark, a senior colleague, had expressed doubt about whether Sophie's team was aligned on the Morrison Project. That's significant. That's the kind of thing that, if left unaddressed, could become a real problem. Sophie finds Joel. She says, "Can I run something by you?" She tells him what Tara said. Joel listens. Then he says, "So Tara used a lot of softeners?" Sophie nods. "Yeah, I might have misunderstood." Not quoting exactly. Something like. Joel says, "Why do you think she did that?" Sophie thinks. "Because she didn't want to be the one delivering the message? Like, she wanted me to know, but she didn't want to be responsible for it?" Joel says, "Exactly. She was passing on a concern, but hedging it so heavily that if you reacted badly, she could step back from it. The hedging is her way of saying, 'I'm not sure I should be telling you this, but I think you should know.'" Sophie says, "So the message is real, even though the delivery was all cushioned." And Joel says, "The message is real. The cushioning is just Tara being careful. The thing to do is take the message seriously and not be annoyed at the cushioning." And this is a subtler, more social aspect of hedging that I want to make sure we spend a moment on. Sometimes people hedge because they're carrying information they feel uncertain about sharing, information that belongs to someone else, or that puts them in the middle of something, or that they think is important, but they're not sure it's their place to say. In these situations, the hedging is a kind of self-protection, yes, but it's also a kind of good faith. They're giving you the information they think you need while minimizing their own exposure. And if you react to the hedging, if you push back on the softeners, if you say, "What do you mean you might have misunderstood? Just tell me what happened," you'll likely cause the person to retreat completely. The better move, as Joel says, is to hear through the hedging to the message inside, take it seriously, and let the person know, with your response, that you appreciate them telling you. Sophie takes this to heart. She sends a quick, neutral message to Mark, asking if they can catch up about Morrison. She doesn't mention Tara. She just opens the door, and Mark responds immediately. "Yes, actually, good timing. I had a few thoughts I wanted to share." And that quick, open response from Mark, no hedging, no cushioning, just yes, good timing, tells Sophie that the concern was real, and he was glad she reached out. The hedge in Tara's delivery was about Tara's discomfort, not about the significance of the message. The message was significant. Let's keep building. Because I want to show you one more kind of hedging that I think is really interesting, and that is cultural hedging. Different cultures have different norms around directness and indirectness, and English, particularly British English, but in many professional and social contexts more broadly, has a deeply ingrained culture of polite indirectness, of saying things carefully, of wrapping hard truths in gentle language. And for learners who come from cultures with different norms around directness, this can be one of the most disorienting things about using English in real-world settings. Sophie comes from a background where directness is valued, and where hedging can sometimes be read as dishonesty or insincerity. In her family, if someone thought something was wrong, they said it was wrong. Not, "I wonder if there might be an opportunity to reconsider." Just, "This is wrong, here's why, let's fix it." And so when she encounters the layered, careful, considered language of someone like Catherine, her instinct is sometimes to read it as vague or evasive. But it isn't. Catherine is not hiding anything. She's communicating with a set of social tools that Sophie is still learning to use and hear. This is something I think is genuinely important to acknowledge in a lesson like this. Hedging is not a character flaw. It is not weakness. It is not deception. In the cultural context of much professional English communication, hedging is a sign of emotional intelligence. It's a sign that the speaker is aware of the other person's feelings, is taking care with their words, and is prioritizing the relationship as well as the message. When you hear hedging and you understand it, you're not just understanding language, you're understanding a whole set of values about how people relate to each other. That said, and I want to be clear about this, hedging can also be used badly. It can be used to avoid accountability, to give misleading impressions, to say something negative while maintaining total deniability. And the way to tell the difference, as we've been saying throughout this lesson, is context and intent. Is the hedge serving the communication, or is it obscuring it? Is the speaker trying to help you receive a difficult truth, or are they trying to escape responsibility for it? These are questions a skilled listener asks constantly, almost without realizing it. And they're questions that become easier to answer the more practice you have with hearing hedged language. Let's do our practice exercises now. Because you've got a lot of new tools in your ears today, and the best way to make sure they actually work is to practice using them. The first exercise is what I call Unwrap the Message. For this one, you listen to any piece of English feedback, at work, in a podcast, in a movie scene, wherever you find it, and you identify all the hedges. Every I think, every kind of, every I wonder if, every might, every shield phrase. You list them, mentally or on paper, and then you rewrite the statement without any of the hedges. What is the speaker actually saying? What is the real message, stripped of all the careful packaging? This exercise builds your ability to hear through polite language to the real content underneath it. And it also helps you appreciate the hedging, because when you see how harsh the unhedged version sounds, you understand what the hedge is actually doing. The second exercise is hedge spotting in reverse. Instead of listening to someone else's hedged language, you take something you want to say, a piece of feedback, an opinion, a difficult truth, and you practice saying it in a hedged way. How would Catherine say this? How would you wrap this in language that's honest but also kind? This teaches you hedging as a production skill, not just a listening skill. And interestingly, practicing the production makes you much better at hearing it in others, because you understand it from the inside. The third exercise is called source analysis. Whenever you hear strong hedging, ask yourself, where is this hedging coming from? Is it coming from care? The speaker wants to be honest but kind? Is it coming from discomfort? The speaker is anxious about the conversation and using hedging to protect themselves? Is it coming from cultural habit? The speaker is simply using the communication norms they grew up with? Or is it coming from strategy? The speaker is leaving themselves room to back away from the statement if needed. Identifying the source of the hedge helps you decide how to respond. Care-based hedging deserves a warm, engaged response. Discomfort-based hedging often benefits from a clarifying question. Strategic hedging might require you to gently push for more directness. The fourth exercise is tracking the sandwich. This is about recognizing the structure of positive, critical, positive feedback in real time. As you listen to someone give feedback, track whether they're using this structure. Where does the positive begin? Where does the critical part start? How does the speaker signal the transition? Phrases like, "That said," "One thing I'd suggest," "Where I think there's room," "I wonder if," "The one area." These are transition markers that move you from the positive to the critical. Hearing them lets you know the feedback is about to become real. Pay attention. And the fifth exercise is the clarifying question practice. This one is for when you're in a real conversation and you encounter hedging that you're not sure how to interpret. Instead of just nodding and moving on, you practice asking a gentle, clarifying question. Just to make sure I'm understanding. Are you suggesting we change the direction? Or, it sounds like there might be a concern here. Can you help me understand it better? These questions don't challenge the hedger. They don't say, be direct. They simply open a door and say, I'm ready to hear the real thing. Practicing this in real conversations will transform the quality of your interactions in English. Because you'll stop nodding along and hoping you understood, and you'll start actually confirming that you did. Let's come back to Sophie for one last scene, because I want to give this story a proper ending. And I want to end on something that shows real growth. It's been about 6 weeks since that first Monday morning presentation to Catherine. Sophie has been practicing. She's been listening differently. She's been unwrapping messages, asking clarifying questions, sitting with hedged feedback, and reading what's inside it. She hasn't gotten it right every time. There was one conversation with Greg where she completely missed his real concern and had to backtrack the next day. But she's getting better. Noticeably, genuinely better. Today, Catherine has called Sophie in to show her the final approved version of the logo. The one that went through 3 rounds of revision after that first Monday meeting. Catherine looks at it on screen for a moment. Then she looks at Sophie. And she says, "This is it. 3 words. No hedge. No, I think this might be. Or, I wonder if this is closer to. Just, this is it." Sophie feels something shift in her chest. Not because she needed the validation, though of course it feels good, but because she can hear what Catherine is saying. The absence of hedging is itself a signal. The clean, direct, unqualified "this is it" is Catherine telling her, we're done. No more revision. This is the one. And Sophie knows enough now to hear that not as a compliment, but as a fact. A clear, honest, unhedged fact, delivered by a person who chooses her words with the utmost care, and who, when she doesn't hedge, means it absolutely. Sophie says simply, "Thank you," and Catherine smiles. She says, "The changes you made in the last round, you really understood what I was pointing at." Sophie says, "I think I understand your feedback better now. The way you communicate it." Catherine looks at her, a little curious. "How do you mean?" And Sophie says, "You're very careful with your words. At first I thought that meant things were fine when they weren't. But now I understand that the careful language is the message. The way something is said tells you how much needs to change." Catherine is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "That's a very good observation." And the way she says it, steadily, without a hedge, without "I think" or "kind of," tells Sophie that it's not just a polite response. It's Catherine saying, "Yes, you've understood something real." And Joel, when Sophie tells him about this later, just nods. He says, "You've been listening." Sophie says, "Yeah, I have." And Joel says, It changes everything, doesn't it? And Sophie says, it really does. It really does. That's what I want you to take away from today. Hearing hedging, really hearing it, understanding it, knowing how to respond to it, changes every conversation you have in English. It means you stop being confused by polite language that contains real content. It means you stop missing the message because you were focused on the wrapping. It means you start engaging with what people actually mean, not just what they literally said. And that is a completely different experience of the language, a richer one, a more connected one. Let me bring it all together one last time, clearly and simply, so you can carry it with you. Today we learned that hedging is the practice of softening statements to be polite, to show care for the other person, to express genuine uncertainty, or sometimes, as with Greg, to avoid the discomfort of directness. We learned the 6 main tools of hedging in English: modal verbs, approximators, distancing phrases, shield phrases, question framing, and positive framing. We saw 2 completely different kinds of hedging: the considered, caring hedging of someone like Catherine, and the anxious, conflict-avoidant hedging of someone like Greg. And we learned that knowing the difference helps you decide how to respond. We talked about how hedging can sometimes be used to pass on important information indirectly, the way Tara did with Sophie, and how the right response is to hear through the hedging rather than react to it. We talked about cultural dimensions of hedging and why it's important not to read careful, indirect language as dishonesty or weakness. And we gave you 5 practical exercises: unwrap the message, hedge spotting in reverse, source analysis, tracking the sandwich, and the clarifying question practice. To bring all of this into your real listening life. This is English at its most human. Careful, considerate, sometimes complicated, always worth paying attention to. And you are paying attention. That's why you're here. That's why this matters to you. Keep going. If this lesson helped you hear something you'd been missing, if it gave you a new way to understand the conversations around you, please share it. Share it with a friend who's working on their English, a colleague who wants to listen better, anyone who's ever nodded along to polite language and then wondered afterward what they'd actually agreed to. This channel exists for all of you. English in Fluency is here for the learner who wants to go all the way in, who wants to hear the whole conversation, not just the surface of it. And we have so much more coming. So please subscribe so you're here for every new lesson as it arrives. This is Alex. Thank you so much for being here today, for listening this carefully, for caring this much about the language. It genuinely matters. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, listen for the wrapping. But always, always unwrap the message.